This is London's dirtiest district. More people here suffer from pollution-related diseases than anywhere else in the capital. Yet there are plans afoot which local people say will turn this area into a toxic sacrifice zone. Will the capital's riverside be choked by its own waste? By the end of the decade, the East Thames corridor will be lined by new power plants, designed both to cope with London's growing waste and sewage problems and to meet its energy needs. Here in Belvedere, in Bexley, on the south bank of the river, private developers are planning a giant new waste incinerator. It'll be one of the largest of its kind in the world and burn 40% of London's rubbish, converting it into electricity. But this incinerator is only one of several proposals which are alarming residents on both sides of the Thames estuary.
Directly across the river is Barking Power Station, the proposed plant, and 3 miles upriver from the Barking Power Station, a sludge burning plant at Beckton. I'm standing on the Corey site at this moment in time, and slightly off there in this direction, you'll find Crossness Sewage Works. And slightly upriver again at Lewisham, there will be also a waste incineration plant, and downriver at Northfleet there'll also be a waste incineration. This is domestic waste incineration plant. It's amazing the amount of pollution these things are going to churn out. It'll definitely have harmful effects on the environment. People are aware of the Amazon rainforests and what is going on in acid rain and the ozone layer, and they're not aware what is going on in their own backyard in London itself.
The plants, all within a few miles of each other, will affect people throughout South and East London.
For a long time, East Londoners have put up with the pollution from a variety of sources over the years. This area already is over the European and World Health Organization levels for nitrogen dioxide. The combined impact of all these incineration processes is going to be disastrous.
I start wheezing very heavily, gasping for air, and it takes a while before I can actually start breathing properly, and it gets very scary. For people with asthma that have to keep breathing in this stuff, it's not doing our health any good. And there's a lot of people going down with asthma now, and they're not too bad at the moment. But how long is it going to last? Are they going to land up like me?
Thamesmead is just the centre of the area that will suffer the fallout from the proposed waste plants. As it is, according to a survey published just this week, Denise Hounslow and others who live in this area already put up with heavily polluted air. Rates of respiratory illness here are amongst the highest in the country. But a survey to which a London programme has gained access suggests that the new developments may make things even worse, multiplying the effect of the pollutants by up to 10 times. So tonight, we examine whether cleaning up the capital has to create new health hazards for Londoners. London needs to get rid of its waste. There's 100,000 extra tonnes of household garbage alone each year. Traditional landfill methods of disposal are becoming less and less viable. Sites are filling up fast. On the other hand, the government is offering incentives to companies which can produce energy by burning waste. Corey Environmental, which plans to build the incinerator on the East Thames, says it makes economic and environmental sense.
Well, we're standing in what is the old borax site down at Belvedere in London Borough of Bexley. And what it's going to become, we hope, is the most modern refuse-to-energy power station in Europe. We looked at about 9 or 10 different sites. We had a number of criteria. First, it had to be very remote from population, which is quite hard in London, but we've achieved that today here. Second, we had to be able to serve it by the river, because we want to keep lorries off the roads as much as possible. And third, it had to be in an area where the planning zoning was favourable towards incineration.
Then there's sewage. From 1998, water companies will be forced to abandon dumping sewage sludge at sea by a government ban. They too are looking to incineration. Thames Water wants to site 2 sewage sludge incinerators at their existing treatment works in Beckton and Crossness.
Londoners individually produce about 3/4 of a tonne of sewage sludge every year. And that sewage sludge in the sewage comes down to the 5 major London treatment works, mostly on the tideway. It's not a practical proposition to shift the scale of operation of Beckton and Crossness sewage treatment works somewhere else. Again, we go back to there being 4.5 million tonnes of this material. To move that anywhere requires us to build another treatment facility, which perhaps is the same size as Beckton, 130 odd acres of land.
And Thames Power is adding yet another plant, a new power station here on Barking Reach, on the north bank of the river. For them too, this site is ideal.
There's not many places where you can have an existing site, particularly with substation connections, 800 acres available as there is there, and it's in an industrial zone that the plant fits in very well. And in the West London, there are not sites that I know available that are comparable to this.
The plants span both sides of the river. The largest will be the waste incinerator at Belvedere. Almost opposite will be a gas-fired power station at Barking. Further along will be the sewage sludge incinerator at Beckton. On the south side of the river, developers propose another waste incinerator at Northfleet to burn most of Kent's waste. To the west will be another sewage sludge incinerator at Crossness. And finally, further up the river, there'll be a new power plant at Greenwich and yet another waste incinerator in Deptford. The siting of the various plants may well suit the developers, and the waste has to be disposed of somehow. But in the eyes of people who live here, the developers couldn't have chosen a more vulnerable part of London. The area is already affected by 4 existing power stations further down the Thames. Just this week, Friends of the Earth named the 4, Kingsnorth, Grain, Tilbury, and this one, Littlebrook, as among the 20 most polluting stations in the country. The residents have been convinced for some time that these 4 pose a serious health hazard.
We get very wheezy, to which we actually bubble inside our chest. It's a horrible feeling, as if someone is cutting off your airways and you're trying to get as much oxygen inside you as possible, but it just isn't going down. And it feels like they're just cutting you off, literally. This is a pretty good day. On a bad day, I wouldn't be able to talk, and I definitely would not be allowed to come outside at all.
She's in no doubt about the cause of her attacks.
I think it's got to be pollution. I've got cats, I've got dogs, and it doesn't affect my asthma at all. I've had allergy tests for them. They've come up negative. I can go outside of Thamesmead Town and I'm fine. On Sunday, my husband took me to King's Lynn for the day. I felt great. I had no wheezing. When I came back home on Sunday night, my chest started wheezing. I had to get straight onto the nebulizer.
And despite giving that, he still has to go into hospital quite a lot.
Thamesmead ranks as one of the worst areas for respiratory complaints. This practice, Lakeside Health Centre, ranks second in the country.
The high rates of respiratory illness that are being recorded at Lakeside would appear from some of the circumstantial evidence that we have to be mirrored elsewhere along that part of the Thames waterfront, going into Dartford and Greenwich. The picture is that the respiratory admission rates are considerably higher than that waterfront area than in actually the rest of the populations in those boroughs, and for that matter much worse than in central Kent.
There's established scientific evidence that pollution can make respiratory illnesses like asthma much more acute. Indeed, the European Community sets strict safety standards for the emission of pollutants like nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. This area already fails the Community's tests, and the new plant looks set to make pollution levels far worse. The European Community sets 2 types of standard. One is a recommended guide value set to improve health in the long term. The other is a limit value, beyond which exposure is deemed dangerous to health. The guide value for nitrogen dioxide, or NO2, is 135 micrograms per cubic metre. The limit value is 200 micrograms per cubic metre. Each developer maintains that his plant's emissions will stay well below EC safe levels.
We are going to be one of the cleanest power stations in the world. You're not going to get dirt from us falling on your cars. You're not going to get smells. You're not going to get odours. The plant is designed to better existing standards by orders of magnitude. It will go better than the proposed EC legislation. It'll be better than anything that exists in Germany or Switzerland at the current moment. And that's because it's going to have some very, very sophisticated gas cleanup equipment put on it.
This may be reassuring in respect of emissions from any one plant, but their combined effect in an environment where safe levels are often already exceeded is quite another matter. According to a report by consultants Rendell Science Environment, commissioned by the local authorities, monitoring sites in the area have registered roadside levels ranging from 119 to 223 micrograms per cubic metre. To these levels, they then added the emissions from each new plant, using the developer's own projections. In Bexley, they found that the worst-case estimate of emissions of NO2 would rise from 119 to 160, exceeding the EC guideline value of 135, but staying below the limit value of 200. In Havering, levels would rise from 119 to 180, close to the EC limit. However, in Barking and Dagenham, they found that emissions would rise from a present level of 173 to 220, pushing the area above the limit. But the highest projections were reserved for Greenwich and Newham, where present levels of 223 already exceed the limit. Here they found that new emissions would push levels even higher, to 260. All in all, levels of NO2 in the area would rise between 16% and 27%. There's a different concern about emissions of sulfur dioxide, or SO2. In general, it's predicted that emissions of SO2 will keep well below the EC limit, though in some areas it might exceed the EC guideline. There are worries, however, that even in small quantities, SO2 can help to create dangerous cocktails.
The pollutants that come out of cars or out of chimneys are just the start of the problem. They then interact with each other and with other substances in the atmosphere. And particularly in the summer, we get a thing called photochemical smog, which is when this complicated reaction occurs. And the results of that reaction are we get ozone, and we also get acids formed. Acids will make your lungs sensitive, and people with sensitive lungs already, asthma, bronchitis, can tell. They go outside and they feel this acid sort of sensation going into their lungs.
The projected emission levels based on annual averages are in themselves worrying enough. But they don't take account of adverse weather or local conditions that can send pollution soaring way above the projections. Now, those conditions may only occur infrequently, but developers like Corey, who want to build an incinerator on this site at Belvedere, are obliged by the government to consider the effects of their emissions in worst-case scenarios. And what quickly becomes clear when you do that is that vulnerable groups like asthmatics are exposed to much greater health risks than previously imagined. London is prone to a weather phenomenon called temperature inversion. That means that cold air is trapped by warm air above it. It's created by stable weather conditions with little wind. The effect is to trap pollutants from cars and power plants for hours and days at a time, when they would normally disperse.
What it means is that the air is not allowed to mix freely. So whatever is trapped near to the ground will stay there until some agent comes along and shifts it, i.e. the strengthening wind, the sun coming up in the morning and breaking down that temperature structure, creating cloud and mixing it thermally. But until something comes along to shift that mechanism, it will stay there. Just before Christmas, in fact, you may recall the second week of December, I think, it was a very cold, settled spell. For about a week or 10 days, we allowed the pollutants day after day to increase. It's a cumulative effect, if you like. And then the main problem was emissions from car fumes in and around the capital, but no doubt there were other pollutants adding to that as well.
Temperature inversion can happen as often as 30 to 100 times a year, and areas like the East Thames are particularly vulnerable to it.
For one thing, we have a ridge of hills over there where I think on a cold winter's night you'd get, in meteorological parlance, a katabatic wind. That sounds pretty dramatic, but what it is effectively is a drainage wind. The air will drain off those hills and the cold air will seep down to the low-lying valley bottom here, the Thames estuary area. And that'll lead to the colder than normal. Here we have a local inversion, so that would aid the trapping of pollutants in this area.
The World Health Organization has devised a safety standard for short-term exposure. It applies to people at risk like asthmatics. The standard is 400 micrograms per cubic metre of NO2 per hour, and for SO2 it's 350.
If you're exposed to moderately high levels for even quite short periods of time, and you're susceptible because you already have bronchitis or emphysema, asthma, cystic fibrosis, then the effects may be quite severe. And furthermore, one of the things that is coming to light is that the lungs are very sensitive in the first months and years of life. And if exposed, and it may be that if exposed to significant levels of pollution in these very formative times for the lungs, these very crucial times, there may be a disproportionate effect.
Rendell's Science Environment has tried to calculate what would happen when unfavourable weather and wind conditions, such as a temperature inversion in winter, combine to trap pollution in particular hotspots in the Thames estuary area. A number of areas could be hit, but the worst affected area would be Plumstead Common. Levels of nitrogen dioxide could reach 778 micrograms per cubic metre. That's almost twice the WHO level. And SO2 levels, theoretically, could soar to 3,500. That's 10 times the WHO safe level. This new source of pollution could blight an area stretching miles down the Thames estuary, affecting hundreds of thousands of people. Yet the government already signalled its intention of making this area, the so-called East Thames Corridor, the site of its most ambitious development so far in the capital. But the new plants could smother all its hopes of attracting people to live and work here.
There's already some of the largest housing schemes in Europe taking place here in Newham. Behind me we've got a whole sector of private sector housing which has been developed over the last 5 years, as well as, again, a lot of social housing put together with housing associations. I don't think anybody envisaged putting a concentration of 4 or 5 incinerators in this part of East London as leading the cutting edge of regeneration. It certainly does not do that. All it really does is give us the next generation of noxious industries.
Further along the river, Barking is planning to transform a derelict industrial zone into an ambitious new residential development called Barking Reach. It's just the kind of thing which Michael Heseltine had in mind when he launched his grand vision of a Berkshire of the East.
Where we're standing is 800 acres of unused land. Once Docklands is finished, they're calling it the most prestigious development in the southeast. There's room for about 6,000 new homes, much needed new homes. If the proposals for gas incineration and sludge incineration go ahead, how on earth are they going to persuade people to invest their hard-earned money into homes at Barking Reach? Has a knock-on effect. So it's going to turn this whole area into what's been called a toxic sacrifice zone. Who's going to want to live here?
This area should no longer be regarded as the place generally for London's waste and London's power generation to take place. That is, in my view, in conflict with the East Thames Corridor development objectives.
Whatever the strength of these arguments, unless either the government or the developers have an unprecedented change of heart, the new plants will go ahead. But their opponents have one more shot in their locker. All right, they say, you may need to burn this waste, but why can't some of it be done somewhere else? This is the village of Esholt in Yorkshire, the location used by Yorkshire TV for Emmerdale Farm. This rural setting is also the site of Yorkshire Water, whose job is to dispose of Bradford's sewage sludge. They now have an incinerator of the kind Thames Water wants to build in London. It's an unlikely setting, perhaps, but it's the only such plant in the area and the population's sparse, so this has made it environmentally more acceptable.
This plant, as you can see, really, there are people fishing by the canal, whatever. It can blend into the environment without any harm. There's no visible plume from the flue, and so people aren't really aware that there's an incinerator there. So it can be installed in the right environmental location. Local people going for planning have brought parties up to have a look at the works, see how it's operating, and hopefully satisfy their fears.
But introducing this kind of solution in London would not be easy.
Whether it's going to be appropriate to locate them further out in the green belt, as you say, does depend upon the scale of the facilities and the environmental impact. And I'm sure that on the face of it, there'll be a lot of opposition, a lot of conflict with green belt objectives.
Another answer would be for several parts of London to share the burden.
I think we're talking about either locations beyond the urban area or a strategy which would have smaller plants generally around London, with each area looking after its own waste generation and its own power. I think we're moving into an area where small is beautiful. And the advantage there is that the energy that's generated can be consumed locally in housing areas and hospitals and so on. Goes to meet local needs. And that has a sort of nice symmetry about it, it seems to me, compared with the mega project of bringing waste in from a wide area to one location.
This is what's being tried out in two London boroughs, Lewisham and Greenwich. The South East London Combined Heat and Power Company, Selchip, has started to build a waste incinerator in Deptford. Selchip originally met resistance from local residents. Today, however, that resistance is all but overcome.
The tenants, when they first heard about the plants, were very angry. They were very concerned about their health. They were very concerned about the dirt and the dust. They were very concerned about the appearance of the building and, again, about the traffic problems. Since the consultation with Selchip and the discussions with them, our campaign against the power plant has now become a campaign to monitor the construction and the workings of the power plant. We've managed to work in unison with the company, and I think the tenants are a lot more accepted to it now.
Keeping things local seems to be the key to success.
It's mainly intended to deal with a local waste disposal problem. The plant will burn at approximately 420,000 tonnes of household waste per annum. Over half of that will come from Lewisham and Greenwich, who we've signed a refuse recycling agreement with for the next 30 years.
But if Londoners are to get local solutions to their waste disposal and power needs, a more concerted approach to siting will be required.
I think it's for government to take the overview. There's a clear issue here that needs a strategic approach. We do need to think about where it's appropriate to locate these new forms, both of power generation and of dealing with waste, in an overall way. We can't just look at this piecemeal and deal with each site as it happens to crop up, because that's going to be in total conflict with our development and environmental objectives for this area.
The government's dilemma is that stopping the proposed plant would look like interference in a private sector initiative. However, leaving the choice of sites to the developers alone might endanger their plans for the East Thames corridor. We asked the Department of the Environment if it would intervene. It said, "It would be inappropriate to comment on the merits of individual proposals, but existing arrangements will ensure that the cumulative implications are taken into account before development proceeds." Perhaps, but hardly anyone down here is convinced.
Developers see this as the fag end of East London. You know, they think, you know, we're East Enders, we'll put up with it. This isn't something which is going to go away and you won't be sure of the impact for many years. It's going to affect people's lives in a very real sense. It already does.